Hey guys, Mr. Novak here. Get to talk to you about our theories of evolution here today. So we'll just kind of get right into it. Theories of evolution, looking at how there are so many different variations of things. If you look at the picture here on the slide, you can see there are a bunch of different beetles. Kind of looking at how do we get so many beetles, right? So some of the questions we'll kind of be addressing in this unit is like, what is variation? What examples can you come up with? Where did that variation come from? Right. So again, looking at all these beetles, how is it that we have so many different types of beetles out there, and where did they all come from? Right. How do we have that? And then kind of looking at some terminology here, we have gene pool, set of genes available in a population. So kind of looking at where those genes come from. Can you have the same? Are they available? And then how does that get passed on from generation to generation? Kind of dealing with the gene pool there. Okay. Some ideas, some old theories of evolution, right? This guy, John Baptiste de Lamarck, JBL, that his friends used to call him, talked about the use and disuse of parts of their bodies, okay? For example, the more you use something, the better it becomes. The less you use something, the worse it becomes. And in his day, he thought, well, that makes sense, right? If you're right-handed, you use your right hand all the time. And once you kind of don't use your left hand, it becomes worse, right? Your right hand's better, your left hand is worse. And then kind of with that, like you could acquire these characteristics throughout your life, and then you pass those on to your offspring. For example, a right-handed person has many right-handed offspring, right? And that's just kind of the way it was. Here's a great picture. In my former days, that was me. Just kidding. But this guy, right? So we know this is an incorrect theory, right? An incorrect idea that talks about how, like, this guy with the muscles, obviously he doesn't pass his muscles to his offspring, right? He acquired it throughout his lifetime, and then he doesn't pass it on, right? So we know that this idea was wrong. Lamarck had this famous giraffes, talk about how the long neck in the giraffe developed with the original ancestor had a very short neck, would stretch to keep reaching the leaves on the trees, right, as they get higher and higher. And over time, that giraffe would stretch just a little bit, and they would pass that on to his offspring. And over time, we would see this accumulation of traits, i.e. stretching in this case, where the giraffe now has a very long neck. Again, we know this is incorrect. Okay, not all the traits people acquire get passed on. Right? It would be great if that was the case, but we don't work like that. Okay. This was very important though, because it started to introduce the idea that organisms are changing, right? When we see our world, we know it's not constant, right? The beetle example again, right? We see these variations out there. They're not the same. So how do they become changed? So kind of introducing that idea was very important for Lamarck's kind of influence on our world. Then this guy comes around, Charles Darwin, kind of the famous guy. I think bioevolution. This is one of the main players out there. He was a naturalist. He was originally going to be a doctor, but he couldn't stomach it. He got real queasy with the surgery, so he kind of quit. Studied kind of the natural world a little bit. Got on board the HMS Beagle and started traveling with them. Right, he went to South America, the Galapagos, Australia, and eventually wrote a book about his findings of the organisms that he studied while on this, and then when he got back to England. Here's just the travels. You can kind of see, right, start in Europe and go all the way around the world. Sweet. Galapagos Islands is kind of his famous spot. That's what we really talk about. Pretty cool islands off the South American coast. They have no land mammals or amphibians there, right? Something unique about them is that these organisms are all different from island to island and from mainland species that we see, okay? And you can see and determine which organisms come from different islands based on the kind of variations that they have. One thing Darwin studied was his finches, right? Darwin's finches is kind of the big one. And we look here, we can see what he kind of discovered at each island. He took a bunch of finches back to England and studied them. He looked and saw that their beaks and their nesting were really different based on kind of their food source. And then from island to island, the food sources were different. And he was able to kind of determine which island they came from. Darwin did a lot of studying on board before he left and then kind of after. And some people that really influenced him Lyell, who was a geologist, studied kind of how the world worked, and then Malthus. And Malthus was a human population guy. Okay. These two guys really helped lead to Darwin's idea that life isn't just real easy. There's a struggle for existence for animals and populations. And that led to really Darwin's theory of natural selection. We'll get to here in a second. Some other things Darwin kind of noticed was that, we can breed for certain traits. We look at dogs, we purposely breed for certain traits or domestic plants and things like that. And he said, well, if we can do this, eventually in nature, it could happen as well. Kind of just naturally, it would take, hundreds and thousands of years potentially, but these dogs could naturally just breed together to create a new breed of dog, or plants could cross pollinate and we could get new plants. And so we say, well, nature can probably do this as well, just not as fast. So we get to Darwin's idea, Darwin's theory, I should say. And again, quickly talk about theory. It's something we believe as true today, backed by evidence. So it is scientific fact here, right? Talk about adaptations, right? Darwin noticed that certain animals have adaptations, which is just a trait, something that allows that organism to be better suited for the environment. Okay, maybe it's speed, maybe it's camouflage, maybe it's a defense mechanism, right? Something like that would be an adaptation. Okay. He also noticed again struggle for existence. Animals are always constantly fighting for space, mates, food, whatever it might be. Okay, and this then led to his idea here in green, natural selection. Those organisms that are best suited for the environment are going to reproduce more successfully, and their offsprings then will have those favorable characteristics. Okay, another guy, Alfred Russel Wallace, proposed this idea, and he basically said, "Hey, Darwin, I'm going to publish a book unless you do it first," which is what then led to Darwin publishing The Origin of Species, and so he gets credit for that. So kind of cool. So again, 4 kind of things you need to know about Darwin's idea or theory of evolution. 1, there is variation within a population. Okay, so not every organism is the same. Okay, those variations must be passed on. Right. So in order for this to kind of work, you have a variation that's beneficial. Maybe it's not beneficial. You need to pass it on. Right. So breeding, offspring, that kind of thing. Number 3, more offspring are produced and can survive. So kind of incorporating that struggle for existence. And then those that do survive have the favorable variations. Okay, they have those adaptations that allow it to survive. So you can see the cheetah down here, right? Speed allows them to catch more prey, better adaptation, survives. Or this frog, see it right in there. Camouflage, right? So allows him to survive better, right? So we talked about fitness with this too, right? Talking about passing on. If you are able to survive, you're going to find a mate. You're going to be able to pass on your genes to the next generation. That is fitness, right? Fitness in a biological sense here, again, talks about those organisms being able to pass on their genes to the next generation, okay? Some other kind of key points here is the environment selects the traits, right? These organisms aren't like purposely trying to be faster. Their environment makes them be faster, if you will, right? Because they have to catch faster prey, right? If they don't, they die, right? That's kind of how that works. So the environment is selecting the traits. So again, kind of looking here, those organisms that are better adapted, right, are going to reproduce more. They have a higher fitness, right? Which means they have more offspring with that trait, with that adaptation. The offspring are better adapted, they reproduce more, so on and so forth. The cycle continues, which again is kind of why we see organisms that are really, really, really well suited for the environment here today. This has been going on for millions of years, right? Organisms are adapted. If they don't, you're not adapted. If you don't happen to have that trait, you're dead. Okay. So again, kind of summary of Darwin, natural selection, organisms best adapted to survive. They reproduce, they have a higher fitness, their offspring have those adaptations. The population is the unit of evolution, right? Individuals cannot evolve, right? Again, you just happen to have the adaptation or you don't. And we see all these organisms with the adaptation generally, because those that do not have it die, okay? And then kind of going back to his finches, he realized like, okay, at some point, this group of finches probably colonized the islands and spread out. Because they had different food sources, over time, now we see that they're adapted to their specialized food source that they eat. Okay, and so that is what we talk about. We talk about like natural selection and survival of the fittest and that kind of stuff. Okay, so just a quick example. This kind of goes with the worksheet you're going to do. Just asking the question: how did the heavy coat in polar bears evolve if their ancestors had thinner coats? Again, so a long time ago, some polar bears had thicker fur than others. Just happened, right? You have a mutation, right? Talk about that in DNA. A lot of them have a little bit thicker fur, which means those with thicker fur, right, had a better adaptation. They were favorable to the environment, right? If you had a thin coat, you're dead, right? If you're dead, guess what you're not doing? You're not making babies. Those thin coats we see then are kind of going out of the population, right? Therefore, the ones with thicker coats are now surviving, they're reproducing, and over time we see thick coats in polar bears. Okay, pepper moth, we'll talk about that later, but that is here. Then the kind of the last thing is the theory then of evolution, right? This idea that changes are inherited, right? And we see this over time. We're not looking at new species arising from pre-existing species, which is that kind of giant misconception we have, right? But we're looking at, how do traits get passed on over time? How does change happen? Okay. And then I put these on here for you in case you need a little bit more information. All right, so go check those out if you want. But otherwise, that is what I have for you today with our theory of evolution. Enjoy.